Welcome to Engaging Ideas, where we bring information and ideas from the academy to the community to help think about real-world questions. Our topic today is China and the potential conflict between China's global ambitions and U.S. trade policy. We'll examine the potential impact that U.S. tariffs and a possible trade war with China might have on China's goal of becoming a global superpower. And few people are better qualified to comment on this important topic than today's guest. Joining me is Shuishen Zhao, who goes by his nickname Sam. He is professor and director of the Center for China-U.S. Cooperation at the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies here at the University of Denver. Professor Zhao is the founder and editor of the Journal of Contemporary China, the country's leading scholarly journal on China. He plays an active role with many organizations, including the U.S. Committee of the Council for Security Cooperation, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. In addition, he's held honorary professorships at Beijing, Renmin, and Fudan universities, all major universities in China. Professor Zhao has authored and edited 14 books and over 30 articles on various topics involving China and is a frequent national speaker. Professor Sam Zhao, welcome to Engaging Ideas.
My pleasure here.
Beginning in 1978 with the economic reforms introduced by Deng Xiaoping, China's rise economically has been meteoric, from a backward economy to a leading economic power in a way that's really quite amazing. With that has come, not surprisingly, ambitions for global leadership. So maybe that's a good place to begin. Could you tell us a bit about China's ambitions, its sort of master plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, put forth by Xi Jinping recently?
Yes, as you said, China has been rising as a great power in the last decade. In fact, China became the second largest economy in 2010. As a rising power or superpower, China should act like a superpower or great power. China has an interest of a great power. So China has pursued those interests in last decades. China has regarded the current international order, which was created under the U.S. leadership, as somehow unjust and also unreasonable. So China has demanded the reforms.
Could you tell me a little bit about why they thought it was unjust and unreasonable from their point of view?
Right, exactly. They have sought reforms of global governance. Why they think that's unfair and unreasonable? For many, many aspects. One of the aspects is that the U.S. dominance in the international order, in the international system. The system was created after World War II. The U.S. accounted about half of the global GDP at that time. And China was a very, very minor, very, very small fraction of the global GDP at that time. So China's voice and China's representation was also very minor. And also emerging economies from the Chinese perspective were also underrepresented.
I see.
And in today's world, the U.S. account of the global GDP has declined from about half to about 25%. And China has been rising from almost zero, or only 1%, to about 15%. But the voice, representation of China in the global governance, in the international system, has not come in commensurate from Chinese perspective to China's great power status. So in that context, China has demanded more voices, more representation. That's part of the reforms that China has demanded.
Tell us a little bit about this Belt and Road plan.
Exactly, that's what we are talking about, One Belt, One Road. It would reform the international system, all the global governance, China wanted to have more voices. China has tried very hard, for example, to increase its representation, voting powers in the existing international institutions like IMF, the World Bank, and also China part of the WTO, World Trade Organization. But U.S., from Chinese perspective, has, although U.S. would like to see China to be integrated into the existing international system, but the U.S. is not ready to see China as a contender. So U.S. has not been very cooperative to help China to increase its voices and representation. There are many those kind of good examples. For example, 2010, China and many emerging economies have demanded to increase their voting shares in the IMF. China was approved by IMF, most members, almost all the members of IMF, to increase its voting share from less than 4% to over 6%. But U.S. Congress did not approve that until 5 years after. And also China created Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank 2015. And the U.S. tried to prevent U.S. allies and partners to join that China created bank. So China has seen U.S. not want to see China as, China act as a great power. So in that context, China has created many institutions, international institutions, all try to work with other emerging economies to create China-dominated, all non-U.S. dominated international institutions of networks. One Belt, One Road is one of those institutions. All schemes China has launched, which started from 2013 when President Xi Jinping visited Central Asia and Southeast Asia. He proposed the 21st century Silk Road and the maritime belt. That's why it's called One Belt, One Road. It's China-inspired and China-led network about more than 60 countries, covers Eurasia
it's
and
very
maritime.
Ambitious, is it
very,
not?
very
Yes.
ambitious,
And
yes.
as I understand it, from, among other things, your excellent paper on the subject, there are a number of roads conceived as a way of reaching out to the world.
Yes. China is a continental power, but China has tried to become a maritime power when China has developed maritime interests. So the One Belt, One Road reached out to two directions. One is through Central Asia, all the way to Europe.
Oh my.
And the other way is through the Southeast Asia, the Pacific, all the way to the East Africa. So this is very ambitious, covers most parts of the world, 60% of the world population, and larger percent of the global GDP.
My goodness. And so what's involved? We have this concept. What are some pieces of it? What are the elements of it?
What the Chinese has tried to do is to build infrastructure, the roads and the bridges, the ports, and many of these type of infrastructure construction in those countries, which I think makes sense because there's a big, huge infrastructure gap in developing countries because infrastructure construction needs huge amount of investments, and also the return is a very long term. Right. So international organizations like World Bank, those traditional international development institutions, have not been able to meet that gap. In fact, there are a lot of numbers, $22 trillion for the next 30 years in developing countries, even just in Asia Pacific, in Asia. The Asian Development Bank has estimated about $1.3 trillion each year in this area. So the traditional or existing international development institutions cannot fill that gap. So that's a niche for the China to play that role. If China played that role well, that could help China to demonstrate its leadership in the world. But the problem here is that I don't think China has been doing well in this front, because there are a lot of problems in these areas. Why the infrastructure development has been lacking in these countries? There are many reasons for them.
Right.
So China cannot easily to fill that gap at this moment of China development.
Right. Now, so against this very ambitious backdrop that you described so well, we have the announcement in March of this year that the U.S. would level about $50 billion in tariffs on Chinese imports to the U.S. Originally, so there was $34 billion originally, and actually today, in fact, the last $16 billion goes into effect. And then, of course, there's now talk about maybe as much as another $200 billion of U.S. tariffs. And of course, China has reciprocated in that as well. So given a couple of things, China's own massive national debt as a result from its own infrastructure projects, which are remarkable in many ways, and a still healthy but slowing economy, and a weakening yuan down about 2.5% since July. So with that as a kind of a backdrop, then you overlay the tariffs. And I'm very interested in how you perhaps see this impacting the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes, China's external environment has been somehow deteriorated in last several years, because as you mentioned here, one of the problems is China's U.S. tension. China's trade practice and domestic economic policy has been very often, from American perspective, taking advantage of the American open society, open economy without having reciprocity. That's the problem from American perspective. That's why we see this trade war, which launched by Trump does not make the, from economics perspective, not make much sense, but supported by many people. And also, this trade war will have major impacts on Chinese economy for sure, because Chinese economy has slowed down, and China has relied more on foreign trade than the United States. In fact, the China's economic growth in last several decades has been export-driven, and also investment-driven, structured investment-driven. So that part now is facing a big challenge by U.S. Trade war. Even without that challenge, I think China One Belt One Road is facing a lot of problems, because as you said, it's very, very ambitious. I would say over-ambitious. Yeah, it's a quite beyond China's capacity at this moment. In fact, the U.S. got in a lot of problems in that end of the Cold War or the end of after September 11, partially because what scholars call the overextension, overplay your ambition beyond your capacity. China is not in a U.S. position yet, but China is already, I would see China as already in a position to overplay itself.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but recently President Xi Jinping received a little caution from his colleagues, as I recall.
Exactly. There are some discontents among his ambitious foreign policy. Basically, China is not a great power yet from many people's perspective, far from the U.S. position. The U.S. sanction, for example, on ETZ, that tech giant is a very good example of awakening call for many people in China. Technologically and many other fronts, China is far behind the United States. So China is not in a position to overplay its hand, to exhaust itself before it reached its level, what Chinese once say, the China dream of rejuvenation of China before that stage. So now, in fact, the One Belt, One Road, they built a lot of funding institutions just for that program. And a lot of Chinese state-owned enterprises, which is very ineffective, but they have taken advantage of those programs. In economics, we call rent-seeking behavior. They just use their influence to get money from the government for those projects which may not be producing sound commercial interests.
Right. So it seems to me we have this this intersection where you have China, with very good reason, having ambitions, a track record of economic growth that's been perhaps unparalleled in its how quickly it's occurred, and great national pride.
For sure.
Intersecting with now these financial constraints and some internal economic concerns. So this creates a dilemma, to be sure. I'm very interested in your view of where this might go. You don't have a crystal ball, but I'd like to know sort of how you see this.
I will see China, as we said, has overplayed its hands, but they have to retreat, have to come to reality of their position in the world. They are far from the position to overtake the U.S. leadership of the global order and on many fronts, although President Trump has retreated from globalization, from global leadership. But I don't think China is ready to put itself into U.S. shoes yet. As you mentioned, economically, the date, a lot of problems inside of China, inequality, environmental issue, a lot of problems could derail China's rise easily. So we cannot take China's rise for granted. And in fact, a lot of Chinese people are also very uncomfortable with China's, Xi Jinping's those grand foreign policy great leap forward of international behavior, international policy. And to be a global leader, you have to provide a lot of public goods, which is costly.
Right.
And also, I don't think China is ready. And for those global issues, for example, in the Middle East, in Syria and other countries, refugee issues, I don't think China is care, or China can care on those issues. So China is not ready to send its soldiers to fight, for example, in remote areas for other countries' interests, which could be public goods, but China is not ready yet. So I don't think China is in a position in the next 10 years or decade to overtake the United States. So that's why in my article, I argued that China is a revisionist stakeholder. China is still a stakeholder of the international system created under the U.S. leadership. It's a huge beneficiary. For many years, the problem for China, for international community, is that China was a free rider. China took advantage of the open economy, the globalization, the free market system, which has been promoted by U.S. and many Western countries to grow its economy, to have reforms, economic reforms. But now China should pay back. That is, China should take more responsibilities to be a responsible stakeholder in the international system. So China still is a stakeholder, but China does have some, I think, legitimate grievances about international system. So the international community, including the US, should work with China to negotiate the reforms of international governance, global governance, international order, to give China more voices, and to work with China to maintain and improve the international system. So I think China's grievance is not about rules, norms, the institutions in the international system, is its status. So we give China the status of voices in the hierarchy, commensurate to its rising power status. Then we will have some more peaceful transition or reforms of the system.
Well, we're gonna have to continue this discussion because this is clearly a very, very interesting area. And Professor Sam Zhao, thank you so much for joining us for this brief but really useful look into the future. And we will most certainly follow up at a future time. I hope you'll join us as we bring more engaging ideas from the Academy to the community. I'm Jim Grismer. Thank you for watching.